You're listening to Season 2 of Beyond Insights, your go-to podcast for all things accounting, business, and technology.
Unsure how to improve your leadership skills, or whether you're suited to being a leader to begin with? Looking for ways to build a stronger team or take better risks? Then stay tuned.
From cybersecurity, blockchain, and AI innovations to sustainability, employee retention, and work-life balance, we've got you covered.
We speak to knowledgeable and insightful guests from varied backgrounds, industries, and locations from all around the globe.
From this multiplicity of thought, we strive to find solutions to our most urgent business problems.
Whether you're a small business owner, an accountant, entrepreneur, or even a young professional looking to progress, this podcast is for you.
Thank you for tuning in. Let's dive right in and go beyond insights.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Beyond Insights. Today we have two professionals in their fields who work together hand in glove to execute changes through businesses. So this podcast aims to show the growing partnership between HR and change management professionals. And without further ado, let's get to it. Perhaps Eve, you can start us off. This is Eve McKenzie. Can you give us a bit of a background about yourself and why you're on the podcast today?
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is a real honor to be able to share some of our insights and also show up with wonderful Tina, who will introduce herself in a second. So I'm Eve McKenzie, have been at Xero for nearly 11 years, if you can believe that. And I have the pleasure of leading the change management function at Xero. And my background has always been in delivery. I have tried to escape delivery. It's never worked. I always gravitate to it. I absolutely love the cross-functional nature, the problem solving that comes with delivery. But more importantly, my real passion is people. So while I support change management as a profession, my background is actually in things such as coaching and energy psychology, even things like meditation, mindfulness. I'm absolutely fascinated with the human mind, and more specifically, how the human mind can influence our behavior. So you bring that together with a wonderful delivery practice like change management, and I've obviously got the lovely luxury of working in my passionate and field. So that's why I'm here today.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Eve. And I'll maybe then hand over to Tina Karia, who is our other guest today.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having the both of us. I love working with Eve, but yeah, my name's Tina Karia. I'm a HR professional with over 13 years experience working in different sectors. You'll be surprised to know, so healthcare, engineering, tech, variety of different sectors, different experiences that I bring for sure. But I would say my sweet spot, similar to Eve, is partnering with business leaders to work on business and people strategy, whether that's working on building a high-performing team or kind of cultivating well-being practices. I have a strong passion for well-being. But yeah, I'm currently a people experience business partner at Xero. Been at Xero for a year and a half now. I used to work with the UK sales team and emerging markets, and now I work with our product and technology teams in the UK, and I also support the lovely SIFT. Alex, you've got to say good things about us now.
Awesome. Yeah. So I was very excited because we actually started planning this podcast a while ago. And I had reached out to Tina. I heard about you. I can't remember who told me about you. Someone else in Xero told me about you. And I thought, I've got to set up this interview. And then a few months later, Tina transitioned to start working with the SIFT team. So that's been really cool from my side, and looking forward to more work together.
Fantastic.
I will just launch into some of the questions for our topic today. So there's a lot of talk about HR and how HR leaders are leaning more on change managers to help them deliver complex changes. How does this partnership work? Maybe Eve, you can start us off.
Sure. Well, you're 100% right. It's definitely a trend that we're seeing. And I think Xero is actually a really good example of where you've got a change team and a PX team that do work together, as you said beautifully, hand in glove. You know, it really is a fantastic partnership. I think what the underlying reason for that is because, number one, they're both people-centered, but most importantly, they're both trying to connect people to business outcomes. And that's actually a bit of a sweet spot that not a lot of people in the business necessarily have as a focus. We're so good at driving commercial outcomes. We're so good at driving project outcomes. But when you put people in the mix of that and you really think about what they need to do to enable something, suddenly then there's actually quite a lot of exciting work to be done. So there is definitely a trend coming up, certainly from what I'm seeing and having the pleasure of working with Tina. There's a real synergy and like a commonality in terms of the focus that we look at. And we come together with very different toolkits, but with similar passions and purposes about connecting those people to outcomes. So that's been a really wonderful addition at Xero anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Alex, you've got experience of this change, I guess. Xero having acquired Sift, how do you feel and how did you feel, I guess, when the change was announced, but maybe how you're feeling now?
Sure. I think it's been quite a journey from when it was announced to now. I think because a lot of us working at Sift, we didn't expect the change. So it felt very sudden and very surprising. We were obviously all very excited, but we didn't really know what it meant sort of practically in terms of our jobs every day. So I thought what was really great was that the sort of Sift management team sat everyone down individually and they said, you can ask us any questions you have right now. And I had sort of written out my whole list of questions, but it was also realizing that maybe they wouldn't be able to answer all those questions straight away. That there are a lot of things that we would have to figure out over time, figure out how Sift and Xero come together. And so yeah, it's been a really big learning experience for me and learning about how the two different cultures can kind of come together, where we have overlaps, where maybe processes are different. So yeah, big learning experience. And I guess one of the things that surprised me is that change is a lot slower than I expected it to be. So it seemed very sudden with the announcement, but obviously it takes time to like fully integrate into our sort of new way of being.
You've hit the nail on the head so beautifully in terms of, I think, what the whole management side of change is. Like change, it is a very personal and individual journey, right? You've just outlined that really, really well. But equally, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that's, done in an instant. It's actually something that is continuous. And so managing something that is fluid and something that is personal and has its own sort of perception around it is actually really hard to do. So I actually don't know if change management is the right name. It's more like, how do you foster, facilitate, encourage change? How do you influence it for somebody? I think that's actually where HR and change management come together. We're trying to make it a pleasant and productive journey for everyone. So I hope that was what you experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best change, I think, is where you plan and execute well, right? Sometimes it isn't an overnight change, but it is planning for different things. And I feel that that's what we've done well with the acquisition with Sift as well. And I hope you'll agree, Alex, because you're on the receiving end.
Yeah, no pressure from me, but yeah.
I know, yeah, and you have to give positive reviews.
Yeah. I thought maybe since we've spoken a lot about change management, maybe people listening today might not be familiar with the term. I know it's something I only kind of became familiar with more recently, and it's become quite a buzzword. So I was wondering what does it actually mean in a business context, and why do you think it's so crucial, especially today? And then adding on to that, maybe we can talk about what some of the common pitfalls are of change management.
Of course. Would you like me to kick off?
I'm happy to kick off for sure. And I'm going to hand the baton to you on the pitfalls because I think you're probably the best person to answer that. But I would absolutely define it as kind of moving organizations, individuals from a current state to a future state. And it really is about minimizing disruption and maximizing adoption. I think you will agree, I think everyone in this call will agree that kind of change is rapid. It could be whether it's a system change, a structure change, etc. It's quite rapid, whether it's technology as well. We're seeing a lot of that. And I think it's how organizations kind of manage change. And those organizations that manage change well will thrive in these days. I think pitfalls, and Eve, I think we've seen probably a few in our career, lack of clear comms, I think, is definitely communication is definitely a key thing, and I've definitely seen in my career, and also resistance. And when I say resistance from employees, I think we forget that this is a change that impacts people, and we forget about the emotional side of things. And I think we are so, as Eve kind of said before, we're so focused on getting to that business outcome that we don't build in that time to think about emotions that might come out, giving people that space, which I think is vital in a change process. Eve, I'm going to hand the baton on to you to kind of expand on that.
You said that beautifully. Can I do something a little bit left field? I've got a bit of an empathy question or a series of questions for you, and I think our listeners who listen to this podcast could potentially do this in their own space. So you're okay if I throw a couple of questions at you?
Yeah.
Or Alex, we'll do them both.
Both of you. Honestly,
Yeah.
there is method in my madness, I promise you.
Correct.
So question for both of you. Do you like change?
I would say I struggle with change at first. I think I need to know, I get to know about the change before I get on board. Because I'm quite a person that I need the details. I don't know,
Nice.
Alex, you probably, you can see you nodding a lot.
I think it's kind of a yes and a no answer for me, because I feel like, when I originally joined Sift, this was more than 4 years ago, it was this tiny company, a startup really. And so over the time that I've been at the company, my role has changed so much. The company has changed so much. The acquisition is obviously like another huge change. So I feel like I'm quite used to change, and I quite enjoy taking on different roles. Like this podcast is something I never used to do, and it's been great to be able to do this. But I also think change can still be difficult, even if I'm saying I enjoy it. Like there are parts of this transition now that I have found quite challenging. So it's a yes and a no.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I mean, my big takeaway from your answer there is that there's a degree of subjectivity to it, right? And sometimes you love change and sometimes you don't. What if I change the question ever so slightly and say, do you like changing? How would you answer that?
I would say yes to that.
Yeah, okay.
I would say so. I think if I think about changing in terms of kind of habits, or like, oh, now I'm going to go for a run every day. Yes, I like the idea of that.
What about the actual practical side of doing it? So getting your body involved.
Gosh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Told
It's
you there was
always
method in the
fun looking
madness.
I know,
Yeah.
it's just making me think, how would I feel about like preparing for that run? Probably not so great, because it's kind of like changing habits, I would say.
What
But
about you,
I think
Alex?
it's kind of baby steps, isn't it, to that
Yeah.
change?
Beautiful.
I think that's an interesting one for me, because it always, like in theory, it sounds great. And then you think, oh, in practice, it's going to be so hard. But funny that you brought up running, Tina, because I recently got into running, and I was sort of doing it on and off kind of since COVID. And then last year, I went for a park run, and I posted a picture on my Facebook, and a friend of mine reached out to me and said, oh, you must come to my park run. And so I went the next week. And it's been nearly a year now, and I've still been meeting her every week. So it seemed like I never imagined that would have become a habit. And just from that exchange, now it's just part of my life.
Amazing. Well, see, there you
Incredible.
go. So there's a very big difference between thinking about change and actually doing change. Now,
Yeah.
third question, I promise this is the last one. What about if I said you have to change, but you don't have a say in the outcome or the process of changing? You just have to do what I'm asking you to do. How would you feel?
Probably resist, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Because not having a part in the change and not being involved in it to be able to contribute. And I think that's probably really important when you're going through change, being part of it, being able to contribute, whether it's giving your opinion, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Alex, what do you
absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, so there you go. So just with those three questions, I've highlighted there's a mental side of change, so your perception of the change, and your answers were pretty much, well, it depends, and essentially the subtext of that is, am I going to gain out of this? Is it good for me? Is this something I'm really passionate and excited about or not? And that's going to determine your answer. And then there's the physical act. And again, that also depends on the change, but you immediately start to think about the actions I need to take, the steps I need to go through, the logistics, the environment, all that sort of good stuff. And then as soon as I take away your ability to have an influence in the outcome, which is essentially the emotional side of the change, immediately you feel, oh, I'm not sure about this. You're going to treat, you're going to tread with a lot more caution. And that is essentially a summary of the pitfalls that happen with change management, because all too often I think we think, well, I get the change, I want the change. And I know this is a dramatic example, right? But if I want something, I need to take people on that journey with me. I can't just assume that they want it as well just because I'm saying so. Equally speaking, just because I communicate the change, as Tina alluded to, I can't just communicate and expect you to do it. There's got to be both a mental, emotional, and a physical side of change. People might actually need help. They might need time. They might need resource. And then lastly, in terms of the outcomes, the more that you can make it palatable for people, it doesn't mean that everything has to be positive, but if they understand the real intention behind it, they know they're going to be supported, and they know that there are some kind of gains out of it, you get the heart involved. And when the heart is involved, then people are more willing to work harder to achieve that outcome. So that's a summary of the main pitfalls.
I know, and that's a really valid point, Eve. I think it's understanding the why. And also to Alex's point, like when we think about Sift and how it was acquired by Xero, but having that leadership visibility there and that support mechanism, I think is really important. So I think what you're saying is emotions are really important, and we forget about that. It's kind of like, yeah, we need to get to this outcome, and we then forget about how people experience change as well. And it can be a bit of a roller coaster, can't it?
It absolutely can. And you've actually hit the nail on the head there. There is something about leaders and leaders of change, and they can absolutely make or break it. So no pressure to anyone listening. But if you are a leader and you are asking something of your people or even your customers to go through a bit of a journey of change, how you show up is so vital. So the more genuinely excited and passionate you are, the more genuinely supportive you are, the more likely people are willing to follow you. So it speaks volumes.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so important to show that you still see the people in your organization as people and not just sort of cogs in the machine. You're not just trying to get to those business outcomes. You do actually want to ensure that their well-being, that they're doing well with the change.
And I think communication is key to that, isn't it? Early communication is key, and getting people on board with the why and where we're going to.
So maybe moving on to my next official question here. How do you see HR and change management fitting together from a process perspective? Is one more of a leader than the other? How do you kind of work together? Maybe start with you, Eve.
Yeah, sure. So in my experience, which again has been mostly of working in technology as an industry. So before Xero, I had the pleasure of working with other tech firms. HR and change management, or delivery practices in general, they did work together, but it was usually on very much an initiative by initiative basis where their skills were very relevant. What I'm now seeing, a decade or so later, is that there is this real movement towards extended partnerships and cross-functional partnerships to help drive more complicated work. So HR, or we at Xero, we call it people experience. We're constantly partnering together because the PX or the HR team, they own so many of our cross-functional, cross-cutting initiatives. So just by default, a lot of the delivery enabling functions such as change management, communications, project management, we're naturally gravitating into that space because it's where the most, business and people impacting work is really happening, especially on the internal basis. So I think it's becoming more of a cemented partnership. It's certainly a really exciting area. They're complementary skills. And we've even started going as far at Xero as having sort of shared toolkits, shared frameworks, shared language, which just makes us more effective together, and it creates, nicer change experiences for our people. What's going to be really interesting, and if I could have a crystal ball, is going to be how can we take some of those people-centered capabilities like the organizational development capabilities and then help think about how we package that up for our customers. So starting to reach outside of the walls of Xero. I think that's the most exciting thing that we could potentially do more of.
And I think I would say the change management toolkit for a HR professional is crucial now. Like we're seeing so much change, and I think it's really important. And I think to Eve's point, We obviously, the HR or people experience at Xero, we partner with the business, so we have that deep contextual knowledge, which I think we bring to that kind of change process. But also employment legislation, which I think is crucial. So when we go, I know Eve and I have worked on a few changes, but thinking about employment legislation and how that will land, and I think that's the knowledge that kind of HR can bring. But I feel that Eve and I have worked very closely together on kind of different projects. And that is, as we've said, hand in glove in terms of the approach we adopt. And the theories are really, really important. And Eve brings so much knowledge in terms of toolkits that we need to take a step back and think about. And I think, again, like we kind of think about the business outcomes, but thinking about the experience of change and how to kind of message the change, and thinking about the different layers of people, the different stakeholders within the change. So I think it's really important, the relationship.
+1.
And maybe we can talk about some of the change management principles and approaches that you've used in the past.
I don't know if you want to speak to the theory, and then I can add my 2 pence in it.
Sounds good. Well, we at Xero, we have our own change management practitioners framework. We did that very deliberately because of the ever-changing, ever-evolving, ever-agile landscape that we work in. It's just so fast-paced. So we needed something that was extremely flexible. And back then, there wasn't really a huge amount of sort of agile change practices on the market. They were more heavily sort of waterfall. So lots of planning up front, execution to follow. And we didn't have that luxury. We sort of had to, build the engine while we were flying the plane, and a lot of the things that just kept coming down the line. I think we've become a bit more disciplined in that regard. So if I had to sort of say, if you want to start out in change management, like what would you look at? Where would you start? I don't think you can go too wrong with something like the ADKAR model, which is part of ProSci. It's just a really simple, helpful methodology, similar to what Tina said. It's all about understanding your current state, understanding your future state, and then devising a really seamless pathway to take people through the various stages they know to get to that future state, that real acceptance stage. So that's really helpful, but that's actually not the common way that people will naturally think about change. Oftentimes it is a little bit more fluid. So you might like to start thinking about, where are your people currently, bringing in some more human-centered thinking around, really understanding their current state, really understanding the role you need them to play up front, really thinking about the different motivators for them, maybe even getting into some co-design if you can, right? Depending on the type of change, like actually get their voice heard, get them part of the design and the execution process. You can always refine, you can always evolve it. But yeah, I've seen a natural sort of tendency to move into that human-centered design thinking way of practicing change.
I could definitely add to that. I mean, there was a piece or theory that I can talk to, which is change network mapping, which I know Eve will be very familiar with, but I think I used this particular process within a previous organisation, which is a different organisation. So we were going through closing down a unit or potentially closing down a unit. But it actually, so as you probably know, I'm based in the UK, and we had a contract with our local authority, which is a borough, and that contract was due to kind of go through consultation with different kind of groups of people. But I think what was key within the change network mapping process is kind of mapping out very early on who the key stakeholders are, those that I needed to influence, those that could potentially pose challenges, and that kind of helped me build a bit of a communication plan around it. So when I talk about the consultation that took place, it was really important that we had the employee voice within that. So that was kind of a local authority consultation, but ensuring that I was able to filter back that employee voice into the employee consultation, or that consultation with different groups of people. And I think that's really important. So it really is there. It's kind of building up an approach, but engaging people very early on. And I think that really helped the process along the way. So it was great to kind of use that tool.
I just had one more thought, if I can add to a potentially helpful tool, just to build on what Tina said, because it jogged my memory. If for those people who are listening who maybe haven't used change management as a methodology or aren't familiar with some of the tools, there is a bit of a cornerstone activity that you could start with if you want to, and it's all about understanding the impacts to people. And it can absolutely be a really lovely sort of supplementary exercise to do with things like stakeholder mapping, like what Tina's outlined. And the reason for that is that when you do communicate to people, particularly in the face of change, they really want to understand, what does this mean for them? So if you can couple an impact, call it analysis, assessment, anything, like the term doesn't really matter, but if you can take the time to understand what this is actually going to mean for your people, and then think about how you're going to flip that into how you map and engage your people, how you communicate with them, it is such a powerful thing. And it actually shows that you've proactively thought about them, which speaks volumes when it comes to change. And equally, a lot of the questions that they're naturally going to ask, you're probably going to be in a position to answer a lot of them. And it's similar to what you experienced, Alex. Like, obviously, there were things when you came into the Xero company, there was natural questions that you were going to have. Your leaders preempted that, right? They gave you the space to do it. They probably knew some things. They couldn't tell you everything, but they could tell you some things, right? And then it ended up being a really nice experience. So hopefully those sort of 3 different tendrils have all come and, manifested that example that you shared earlier.
That's a really, really good point. And it kind of, even talking to the example that I mentioned around getting the employees involved early on, as you said, is great, because we then had employee representatives that actually acted as a bit of a coalition in terms of the change, and being able to cascade change and being able to filter how the employees were feeling to the leadership team. And I think that was crucial, because they were really able to sell the change as well for us, which is an added advantage. So I think, as you said, really thinking about who the change is going to impact is really important.
Love that.
Yeah, definitely. I think really important to think about who's being impacted, and then, like you said, have that early communication, getting people involved. I think is really important.
100%.
We spoke a little bit before about how sometimes we might feel quite resistant to change. I think sometimes it's inevitable. I know we speak to a lot of accountants who are considering changing their accounting software, very different from the organizational change we've been talking about, but it's still change, and I've still seen like a lot of resistance to change. So how do you kind of tackle that resistance?
Would you like me to start?
Morning.
Yeah.
You can say this
So
one.
I'm happy to take this one. Please jump in though. So let's start with a bit of a lens on accountants and bookkeepers, obviously our loved partners. You're absolutely right, Alex. Like, even if they are thinking about things such as, changing their accounting software or changing any kind of system, it is still a big change, because it is a really core part of their practice. It has impacts to core parts of their workflows. It has impacts in terms of their client experience, the people's roles and responsibilities. So it is actually a very transformative decision to make. And hence why, the resistance isn't just to a certain tool or a certain company. It's actually because of what it's going to mean, like the whole collective of the impacts that it's going to mean for their practice. So it's often not really one thing, is sort of my point. It's usually it's the collection of everything, and they're looking at everything that needs to be done, and therefore they're probably feeling a bit overwhelmed. And that's usually the root cause of any resistance. It's just, it feels bigger to them than it might to an outsider looking in. They are the ones, if I use the head, the heart, and the body, they're the ones who are not just having to think about it, they're the ones who are having to try to get people on board with it, get on board with it themselves, and then do all of the heavy lifting to actually change. And so resistance is so subjective. It's very much about how the person is wired and the stories they're telling themselves and what they're seeing. But oftentimes it is coming from something that they can see coming up for them. It's a detail or something that they need to do or they need to be a part of that they're either not feeling safe about or not feeling clear about. And so a big thing when it comes to resistance that I certainly think about is helping people articulate what's happening for them. Where's it coming from and what do they need about it, so then we can take some constructive actions. What do you think, Tina?
No, I completely agree. And I think resistance is normal. Like, any change, like resistance is pretty normal. And I think it's the uncertainty and not knowing what's to come. But I think, as you said, I think sometimes it is really thinking and kind of taking things in bite-sized portions, right? And celebrating those early wins and kind of demonstrating the benefits of the change that may come, I think is really important. And I think being open and honest, I think that plays a huge value in change processes. I think being open and honest with what you know, what you don't, as you said, Eve, is really, really important. I don't know, Alex, your opinion on it, I guess. How have you felt now that you've integrated with Xero? How are you feeling?
I think a lot more settled than I was at first. I think it's also that I felt a lot of uncertainty, as you've said at the beginning. I kind of thought, this sounds great, but what does it actually mean? What does it mean for me? Like, what is the future going to look like? So being able to have those conversations and have the leadership be like very transparent about what they knew, what they could share, what they were still like figuring out, that was really helpful. Even if I thought, okay, they maybe don't know exactly everything, at least they're going to communicate that with me and we'll have this open dialogue going forward. So that was really helpful.
Yeah, and being able or having an avenue to voice your concerns because I think they're normal, and I think we should just recognize that as well.
Agreed.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing.
And then Tina, maybe I will direct this next one at you. How do you measure the success of a change management initiative? Are there certain metrics that you would typically use?
There's quite a few. I think there's a few qualitative and quantitative kind of ways that you can think about or metrics that you can think about. I think one particular one is, of course, adoption rates. For instance, if it's a system, policy, or process, how many people are actually using it? Looking at productivity measures, I think that's really important, as well as business outcomes. Again, HR professionals can very much focus on people metrics, but thinking about business outcomes, whether that's increased revenue, reduced costs, for instance, we do have, of course, people metrics and HR metrics, whether that is engagement pre and post change, EMPS, whether you're thinking about absenteeism, turnover, how does that kind of look like? And whether you're looking at training for a particular change, looking at how many people attend the training and how much that kind of learning is being taken on board and implemented. I'd probably say some of the main ones. Eve, I'm sure I'm missing some.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it depends on the initiative, doesn't it? But I think the key point that was such a vital one, and sort of the big takeaway from that point is, if you're going to do anything, make sure you have a people outcome, or what exactly is it that you want to measure. And if your people outcome can connect to your business outcome that you're looking to drive, even better. But make it measurable, make it tangible enough that you can actually see how close you're getting to it, or maybe even exceeding in good cases, right? That's honestly your best tool in that scenario.
I agree. And I think one of the other things that I did in a previous organisation, and this is probably an organisational change in terms of structure, but actually, yes, we went to the outcome, which was implementing an organisational structure. But that's great because you've achieved that outcome. But how then does it look in 3 months? Are we achieving, or is that structure achieving what it needs to achieve? So doing that 3 month, 6 month view outside of that change is really important, and being able to reflect on the change as well and how people are adopting the new structure is really important. So that's something I used to adopt in a previous organisation as well.
I once had a mentor who said to me, change has a small head but a really long tail. It's exactly what you've just highlighted
And that's
there.
exactly
It's so true.
it is so true, isn't it? I just think sometimes we think we've reached the end point, this is great, this is now done. But actually, in 3 months' time, is that structure still effective? How are people receiving that structure? And are there other changes that you need to make? I don't think it just ends at, yes, it's implemented now, as we know, Eve.
Agreed.
So it's never sort of a static thing. It's always changing, always adapting.
It is. It's fluid. It's gone are the days that you've got these ring fence change, isn't it? We've just got changes all around us. It's this constant. But yeah, the nature of it is now much more cyclical than it's ever been.
Absolutely.
Looking towards the future, maybe what are some emerging trends in change management that maybe HR professionals should be aware of? Eve?
Sure. So I'm going to start with just some basics of change management, and then I promise I'll tie it together. So if you're a HR professional and you engage a change manager, chances are they're going to be pretty ambidextrous in terms of the nature of the changes that they look after, if they're well-versed in business change. So it could be anything from a system or digital transformation. It could be something a little bit larger like a operating model change. It could be something in terms of your culture, or it could be something in terms of your more structural change, so the sort of people change side of things. I think the major trend that we're seeing in HR is that the HR professionals are now becoming so much more ambidextrous in what they do. And so they're picking up and they're holding the pen on so many of these initiatives. So yes, there's still the traditional changes that they'd lead, the people and org change stuff, but there's now so much more, and they really are getting called in as these trusted business partners like Tina. And so I think that the natural partnership that's coming about is that as these HR professionals start owning more, they're going to need more support from delivery functions such as change management to obviously help them execute these things, really effectively. And so I think that's the number one trend. But if I have to go another step further, I think there is this real expectation being placed on HR professionals that if it's people related, they'll be able to help. So they're getting involved with everything such as, not just from like a change initiatives, but from cultural programs, from employee onboarding, employee experience initiatives, talent development initiatives. There might even be some things where people connect with customers. Honestly, the world's their oyster. So the nature of the changes, the nature of the initiatives, and the nature of their responsibilities are changing. So I think that's the biggest trend to call out.
I think people impact and change on people is like it touches on everything, right? And I think as a HR professional, you almost have to wear the hat of many, as you've quite rightly said. And I think the toolkit of change management is so important. And whether that is kind of being aware of some of the theories, but also how to implement some of those in like practical day to day, I think is important. And I think we've touched on a few of those, which I think which is hopefully your listeners will find really useful.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they will. I'm learning a lot already from this, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate it.
Good.
Maybe to turn it to you now, Tina, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to someone who is leading a change initiative?
Yeah, this is can I give loads of advice? I feel like there's just so much there's so much that you could talk about, but I think it's also like don't underestimate the power of early conversations. I think it's so crucial to bring people on the journey as soon as you can to build that trust and involve people. And I also think being really clear on the why, and as I think we've said it quite a lot, it's being able to communicate quite openly, but also being consistent about the change message. I've seen change processes go wrong where the message has been inconsistent from different leaders in terms of the information. So then you've got employees or staff that are questioning the change and actually the legitimacy of the change as well. So I think it's really important to be really consistent with that message so that really passes through the organisation. Eve, I'm going to hand over to you. Do you have anything else to add?
I completely agree. I think there is some importance in getting your framework or your methodology right, because there's no one size fits all. So it's really sort of taking some time to understand the true nature of the change, and then selecting your relevant toolkit that's going to obviously help you get there. But there is this is a shameless plug, I'm so sorry, but there is something that my team and I created for Xero, and I have shared this with some of our accountants and bookkeepers in the past. So this isn't new, but it still has stood the test of time. And that is our 3S model. So what that means is no matter what the change, there are 3 S's that you can keep in your back pocket. So number one is obviously start simple. So when we think about change, we have a tendency, because we're wonderful humans, but we want to do everything at first. So it's like, how can you just make it simple? It's still going to be a fluid journey. You can still build on it over time, but start with the most simple scope of work. And that will just help you compartmentalize and, move through some of the chaos and just start with something that's going to be really ring-fenced, get your trainer wheels off, and then you can build from it. The second thing is make it safe. So we've talked about, the heart side of change. So the more safe and engaged and trusting people feel about the change itself, the more willing they're going to be to play a role in it. So again, this is probably a shout out for the leaders of change out there, but the more that you can make your people feel safe, meaning how can you help them feel familiar? How can you help them feel engaged? How can you help them feel reassured where possible? Then they're going to be more willing to play that role. So make it safe. And then the third is add structure. So change, just by its very nature, there's a lot of unknown, there's a lot of grey areas, and there's a lot of fluidity. So a bit of structure, whether that's a simple plan right through to a comprehensive project management toolkit, or it could be a mixture of everything, deep analysis, deep documentation, however you like to work, or it could be something as simple as a brainstorm. But the structure will just give you a bit of a methodology to work through, and it just helps sort of channel all of the chaotic points into something that's really, clear. It creates a bit of a funnel. So yeah, there you go, the 3S model.
I really can talk to that, Eve, because I feel like in the chaos of change that we've worked in, I feel like you are our person that helps make things simple. Let's break it down. Let's think about all these things in a more structured way.
Oh, I love that. Well, there you go. That's the 3S model.
Oh, that sounds like a great model. I think we can have one shameless plug for the for the podcast. So I think that's a really useful model to work with. So then we have a little tradition on the podcast where we end with some rapid fire questions. So I'm going to ask both of you each of these questions. You can let me know what's one piece of software. I have to say, obviously, except for Swift and Xero, because we'll just take those for granted. One piece of software that you can't live without.
First, I would probably say ChatGPT or Gemini for sure. It's all, I think I can laugh and say this, but obviously, maybe a plug, a supercharged work buddy that absolutely never sleeps. And I think it's so great. Like, I tend to use it even if I just want to ask it a question or a general thought or a summary of information that I've got. It's such a tool to have, and it's something that I'm trying to use more. But also Slack. Eve and I are very separate in terms of time zones. Eve is in New Zealand and I'm in the UK, but it just allows for that real-time communication. So yeah, those are my top two.
Love that. I'm also a big fan of Gemini. I can't live without it. And it's, I'll be honest, it was actually one of those tools that I was a bit reluctant about at the start, but the more I've used it, the more that I've actually seen its value. So I'm definitely a Gemini fan. But if I had to pick one, Tina's going to laugh at me, it would have to be Miro. I love a good whiteboard, and I'm a remote worker, so I do actually have my own whiteboard. That's how much I love them. But it's unfortunate that I can't use it with other people, which is where the real power happens. So a Miro is essentially a way that people can jump in a virtual whiteboard, brainstorm together, collaborate together. It's cloud-based, it's amazing, and I live and breathe it. And I think there's a bit of a running joke that I should have shares in it, which I absolutely don't, but I just absolutely love the tool.
I can definitely attest to that. Not that Eve has shares in the Miro, but she's great in Miro, and I've definitely learned a lot.
It's my best friend. I love it.
It's a great tool.
The cool thing about a lot of these tools, I think, also that all of them span working in this sort of international way that we do now at Xero. So you can work asynchronously, but you can be on the same project in the same tool, and that's really, really cool.
Yeah, it connects people, doesn't it? It's amazing. The friendships and the relationships that we've built, Tina and I have never met in the flesh, but we've worked together so closely, and I think the tools have really enabled that, whether it's a communication tool or a collaboration tool. But yeah, really is amazing.
And our next question is, what book or article have you read recently, or podcast you've listened to recently that has been the best thing that you've read or listened to?
We should do a shameless plug of this podcast, but
yes,
this of course. But the Diary of a CEO, I think the guests offer such an honest insight and into kind of leadership, but also resilience. And I think I've really enjoyed that podcast. Eve, I'm going to hand over to you. You've got to say this now.
I was literally going to say the same thing. I love that podcast. It is amazing. So I'm going to think of another one. Actually, I've got it here. One second. I'm going to nerd out just a little bit. So in my passion for people, I absolutely love keeping across the latest trends of neuroscience. And the reason for that is because there's some absolutely groundbreaking science and findings coming out of some of the research. It's absolutely amazing. Anyways, there is this book. I'm going to hold it up here, Neuroscience for Organizational Change. It is a Hilary Scarlett book, and she is incredible. So she brings this beautiful blend of the latest science, but she translates it into a business setting. So for those of you who are listening who do want to understand a little bit more about how humans operate, particularly if you're in a role or if you're in some kind of a practice setting where you really need to influence people. It's amazing. It's something that I've encouraged my whole team to learn about. We practice some of their pieces of advice in it. It's obviously sitting on my desk all the time. Can't live without it.
Need to read that.
Yeah, super cool. I will add it to the episode notes so that if any of our listeners are interested, they can go find it.
Amazing.
And then next question, what's the most valuable lesson that you've learned about building a business? Start with Tina.
That your culture is your business. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if your people don't feel connected or feel empowered, it won't work. That's probably the one piece of advice.
Mine's similar. You can see why Tina and I work together so well, but it's the secret currency of an organization is your relationships. So especially when you're in roles like ours, and probably more mine than Tina's, but change management, it's not an absolutely, critical cog in your business. It sits across your business and it's sort of engaged, in pockets and on a case by case basis. So they don't need to engage you, right? Your businesses don't need to engage you. The thing is, they want to engage you for good reason. And so much of that comes down to the fact that you've got deep relationships, there's real trust, there's real rapport, and they know you do a good job. And so, yeah, relationships as a secret currency has just always been something in my mind and helps me partner with, my stakeholders and business units.
Amazing. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it ties together really everything that we've been talking about today. I suppose a final question I have, if people are listening and they forget the whole podcast and they only remember one thing, what would you want that one thing to be? Like, just take one key lesson away.
That's a tough one. I feel like there's so many good nuggets. But I would say, look, change is inevitable. It's going to happen. But I really think it's how you plan and execute the change that's really important. And I think the people experience is so vital for the process, and it can either make or break the outcome. So I think, as we've said throughout the podcast, it's involve your people early on. Open and honest communication is vital, and also just giving that room for that emotional outlet. Like, change is hard, let's be honest, but it's happening all around us, so I think we need to be prepared as well.
I agree. I think big takeaway is, don't forget, the number one rule of any kind of change is connecting people to outcomes. So how do you do that? How do you really get their minds involved? How do you really get their emotions involved? And how do you get their behaviors involved? If you've got a strategy that designs for those three components, then you've got the greatest likelihood of success.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today on the podcast. I've learned a lot about change management and HR, how the two work together. Also, yeah, some really good insights here into remembering how important the people are in your organization, that change is hard, but if you can communicate it the right way and you think about how it's impacting your people, you keep that space for open communication there, then it doesn't have to be quite so hard. So thank you both so much for taking the time to share your experience and insights with me today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you to everyone who was listening. We'll see you again next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Insights podcast.
Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to right now.
And please share with any of your colleagues or friends or family members that you think might benefit from listening to this podcast.
That's all from us. Until next time, see you then.